Hey, good evening. It's Thursday, September 15th. And thank you so much for being here and welcome to Everyday Talk 24/7. Last night, I talked about this idea of when we're furious at something, what does that tell us about us? What is that? How can that help us when we understand we're furious about something? And we looked at the story in 2 Samuel 12, this powerful narrative of how David is confronted with his own sin. And Nathan the prophet delivers the message of rebuke in such a way that David is completely humbled by it. Now think about the problem that, quote unquote, in human terms, the problem that Nathan had. This is David who loved the Word of God, who knew the Word of God, who relied on God countless times and trusted the Word of God. And here was David doing absolutely outrageous, heinous things before God. So Nathan knows that knowledge isn't the problem here, because David has already been rationalizing all of the reasons for his sin with Bathsheba, up and including even the murder of Uriah and the giant cover-up that came from that. So confronting David head on is most likely not going to do anything other than to bring on the wrath of the king, and for David to continue his self-justification process for his rationalization for his sin. So what Nathan does, using God's wisdom, is he has David convict himself. He has David be the one who calls out his own sin. And there's this story of the man we talked about last night, the man with the little lamb and the rich guy with thousands of lambs. And he decides, not take anything from his precious flock and takes this man's one lamb that he has and uses it for basically supper for a friend. David hears about this and he's outraged. He is in a wild fury because once Nathan reports the story to him, David was furious. As surely as the Lord lives, he vowed, any man that would do such a thing deserves to die. He must repay 4 lambs to the poor man for what he has stolen and for having no pity. So David nails it, nails everything that's wrong. And he's totally outraged about it. But you see, at this time, his anger is the wrong kind of anger. Because good, righteous anger, which we need but yet actually don't have very much of, it's kind of a double-edged sword there. We need to have righteous anger, but most of the anger we have is nowhere near righteous. And the way you can tell about something if it's righteous anger is if it gives us peace and settledness and we go to God with a plan of action. If it's the wrong kind of anger, we're defensive, we're mad, we're upset, and we go to ourselves for action, and we have no peace. So in this case, David has no peace. All there is just flies into a rage. But in his fury, he condemned himself. And now Nathan is ready to strike. Without making any charges against David at all, he just looks at David and says one thing: you are that man. You are that farmer, that rich farmer. You are the one who has turned away from God. And David's response, and I'll leave out the part of the extreme punishment, the discipline God's going to give to David. But David responds of this way. After Nathan called him out, David said, he confessed to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. And this forms the backdrop for Psalm 51, which we're going to be looking at a little bit later on. But Nathan used David's own anger and fury to convict him. This is important for us to examine ourselves in this way. We find ourselves just outraged by something, and we're not doing anything positive about it. We're not trusting God. We're not having a peace. We're not really helping people. We're not resolving this thing in such a way, but we are just furious about certain things. We need to take a look at our own hearts. Maybe what am I covering up? With parenting, this is a huge opportunity in parenting, because children can be extremely defensive, as you know, and extremely adept at dodging the issue. So this is not for young children, but as your children begin to approach middle school, you can begin to give them scenarios and examples like this. If they think someone's treating them unfairly and they're angry about it all the time, you can set up a scenario that talks about how they have been, how you take a person who is not treating somebody fairly and say, well, son, daughter, what do you think about this? And if their response is along the lines of, well, that's terrible. You need to do something about this. You need to stop it right now. Then you still have the opportunity to call that person to say, sweetheart, that's you. This is something you can do as husband and wife. This is something you can do with yourself. You can do it with your children, those close to you. It requires sensitivity, patience, care, but it's a tremendous window that God has given us here to work with our conscience and to realize the problems that we have are not primarily knowledge problems, but they're problems of the heart. And what Nathan did was he put David, the heart, right at the center, and let David convict himself. And David responds in humility and brokenness. He's got a hard life yet to go, but he gets the depth of his sin. And that's our goal. So what we're looking at, what our goal is, it's not about knowledge, it's about the heart. Appeal to folks and let their own anger and fury convict them. It doesn't necessarily work every single time, but it's an effective tool that we can use to overcome sins that we are blind to otherwise. It's getting to the heart. It's not about knowledge. David had all the knowledge in the world, and it didn't stop him. But when he was confronted with the sins of his own heart, it stopped him dead in his tracks. It's not about knowledge. It's about the heart. And that's the thought for this night. And we'll continue looking at this theme. Thanks so much for being here. Check us out everydaytalk247.com. If you haven't subscribed, turn on post notifications. These videos will come right to you. Thank you so much for being here. Lord willing, we'll see you tomorrow. You have a great night.